Hello, and welcome to Dishelved with Adam White. Today I'm going to have hopefully a short little video on the Essential Rawhide Kid. Now, these Essential volumes are black and white reprints that Marvel used to do before they started doing epic collections. And I personally like the black and white reprints. I thought you got to see a lot of good art without the poor coloring quality from the time, and it really focused on the inks and stuff, and I thought I'd really enjoyed them. But I broke this one out and read it finally, and I have a huge collection of essentials, and I really enjoyed this. Uh, like I said, you can't get them anymore, but this collected the Rawhide Kid numbers 17 through 35. And it started at 17 because it just took over from another comic. They used to do that all the time. They just, if they were canceling one comic, they'd just keep the numbering going with something else. So I'm honestly not sure what this was before it was a Rawhide Kid, but um, it was 17 through 35. You can get them still today uh, in color through Marvel Masterworks. Now I looked it up. The second volume is easy to get, and there's two volumes, and they collect the 17 through 35 that's in this. It's just split into two books. Uh, the second volume you can still pretty readily get, and you can get both of them on Kindle at a much cheaper price than the hardcovers. But so you can actually still get these if you want to read them, which hopefully you will. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the origin of the Rawhide Kid, which may sound familiar to you Spider-Man fans out there. Uh, a young boy, Johnny Bart, gets taken in by his uncle, who it was never really clear whether it was really his uncle or if it was just a guy who took him in and he called him. But he called him Uncle Ben, which right there you've got, before Spider-Man, an Uncle Ben taking in a young one to teach him. And in this case, he taught him gunfighting. And he spent years and made Johnny Bart into the best uh, gunfighter he could. Now, he also taught him that there was a responsibility that came with having that much talent with a gun, which again may sound familiar to Spider-Man fans, teaching about responsibility. And one day, and I'm not giving much away because it's right in the first issue, and then they actually reprinted again later because they reprinted it in an issue later on, so you actually get the origin twice in here. But while he's in town, uh, these two bad guy gunfighters come up with a scheme because Ben Bart, his uncle, was supposed to be the fastest drawer around. And so, of course, they wanted to make a name for themselves. And the one guy got behind him that he didn't know about, and the other guy went up to him and said he wanted to face him. And right when they're getting ready to draw, the guy behind him distracts him, and so he shoots and kills Uncle Ben. Again, sound familiar? So Johnny Bart finds his Uncle Ben dead and goes after the men that uh, killed him and gets a confession out of them, and then decides to become the Rawhide Kid and go around righting wrongs. So again, this is a precursor to Spider-Man in that sense. So you're kind of getting a Western Spider-Man. And he doesn't wear a mask or anything. And then something happens that he gets involved in a situation and there's a misunderstanding, and the authorities think he's guilty of something, and so he becomes an outlaw, and he's wanted everywhere he goes, even though he didn't do anything, and he does good wherever he goes. And most of the time, the lawmen are like, well, there goes a real man, and I'm going to let him go, and, stuff like that. Something else that's really interesting in here is that all he does is shoot the guns out of the hands of the other, gunmen. He doesn't kill anybody. He just shoots the guns out of their hands. Now, I'd say that had a lot to do with the comics code, the stupid comics code, and because it was really prevalent when these issues were coming out for the first time. And so he just shot the guns out of the hands of the other people, and then we're like, oh, they're like, we can't stand up to the Rawhide Kid, so we'll turn ourselves in, and it just it pretty much went like that every time. But he did a lot of good things for people, and he was just an all-around good guy, and he'd do things where kids would look up to him because he was an outlaw, and so he'd do things to make himself look bad in front of them so that they wouldn't want to be an outlaw. And I mean, he was a really conscientious guy, and it was a lot of fun to read. Now I can show you something. I'll just randomly show you. And again, this is in black and white. You can probably get this on eBay or something, but if you want the color ones, you can get the oh, that was a particularly interesting one with the mystical living totem. That was one of them that was kind of far out that was in here. I really enjoyed that one. Where was the cover to that? Right here. I really like that. Beware the terrible totem. Death to the Rawhide Kid. But it was a lot of stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. The artwork was great. Most of it, they were all written by Stan Lee, and most of them were drawn by Jack Kirby and inked by Dick Ayers. Dick Ayers did a couple of them on his own, and Jack Davis also did some towards the end of the run in this book. But most of it was Jack Kirby. They also reprint. They put text stories in that were 2 pages long, and I think that had something to do with so they could ship them at a certain price, that because it had printed material in it like that. But lots of good stuff in here. I really enjoyed it. I mean, the Western fan in me wishes that he could have just shot people down. But because that's what you see on all the TV shows didn't have to put up with that at the time, so why should the comics have to? But I like watching stuff like Gunsmoke and Rawhide and the Rifleman, and they didn't shoot people's guns out of their hands, they just shot people, but it was always within the law. So but I really enjoyed this Two Gun Kid, or I'm sorry, Rawhide Kid. There was lots of kids in the West in Marvel. But I also read, you can get online a couple, I think like 4 or 5 issues of the Two Gun Kid on Kindle, and of course in back issues if you can find some in a comic shop or something. But I don't know how expensive those are, but they had cheap little $1.99 an issue, and they had like 4 or 5 issues of the Two Gun Kid and Kid Colt. Everybody was Kid something. I read some of the Two Gun Kid, and his origin Now, stop me if you've heard this before. As a young man that comes into town who's never handled a gun and gets shoved around by the local gunfighters, and he takes up with an old man named Ben who acts like an uncle to him and teaches him how to shoot and become one of the best gunmen in the West. And he said, you know, you have a responsibility with this power. Not quite in those words, but and then the Two Gun Kid did wear a mask. And then he was also mistakenly treated as an outlaw, even though he was a good guy. So you can see there's a lot of similarity in the Rawhide Kid and the Two Gun Kid. I haven't read the Kid Colt yet, but I'm almost willing to bet there's an Uncle Ben in there somewhere. But so apparently Stan Lee had a thing for wise Uncle Ben's teaching power and responsibility, because they show up a lot apparently in these comics, and of course ultimately most people would know in Spider-Man. But anyway, Rawhide Kid, lots of fun. Great if you're interested in westerns, western comics. Uh, I really enjoyed it. Uh, Clever stories. Uh, like I said, that one kind of mystical totem pole one, there'd be ones like that every once in a while. And so it really mixed it up and made it interesting to read. So that's pretty much all I've got to say about these. Again, you can get them on Kindle, the 2 volumes of Marvel Masterworks in color, and you can readily available is the second volume, but the first volume you'll probably have to find on eBay if you want a physical copy. But anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble this week, and I hope to catch you sooner than later.